Hello PLO Order, what's up and welcome to the latest video. This time the topic is c-betting on 7-6 deuce. And this turned out to be a pretty interesting situation, not just for c-betting but also donking strategies and how to make sims for that and so on. So let's get started and let me tell you what our situation here is. Alright. Let's start the hologram. Good evening. Are all donks the same? Well, the situation is button versus big blind. 7-6 deuce single suited. And PLO Vision uses PLO 500 rate structure for the sims. And in that simulation, big blind should donk this flop 13% of times. Then I run a small state sim with higher rate, and now big blind donks 23% of times. And that was something that really caught my eye, like why we suddenly donk so much more. And here's the reason. In PLO 500 sim pre-flop, big blind calls 41% to button open, and then 3-bet some, but the calling range is 41%. And in the small stake sim, the pre-flop calling range is 32, which means that big blind calls around 3/4 of the hands that PLO 500 sim calls. So two different sims for different rate structures, and they have different calling range pre-flop. Now, the donking range is quite similar in both. But of course, from tighter range, where the total amount of hand is smaller, if we donk the same hands, then the percentage is higher. It's higher portion of the hands. And that's what causes the different number. It doesn't mean that we donk twice as many hands. We by the way donk the same amount of hands, but it's smaller portion of our total hands, because in the small stake sim, we call a bit less pre-flop. And that's what caused the situation. I was wondering for quite a long time, why do we donk so much? But in the end, there's the reason. And that's often what happens is the sim is there is a reason for the numbers. And if you can figure out the right reasons why the numbers come up, that's when you can create good strategies. And it's a really good example of solver not being absolute truth. Like, if I would say that, okay, in my strategy, I donk around 23%, 25% of my hands here, and someone says, solver says 13, you cannot do it. Well, the same solver says 23, and it's actually the exact same range. So, you can see that you can make a lot of sims. So, suddenly I have quite many donking strategies for the same board done with solvers, and everything is correct, and everything is different. So that's the reason why we have different donking strategies. And now today's topic is what's our plan in the button versus different kinds of donking strategies. We know what's the GTO strategy or solver strategy is versus solver donking range. But what if the opponent donks more? What if he donks less? What if he's very straightforward player and we don't even have to be balanced? So let's get started. So button versus big blind check. So now the situation is that the flop is 7-6 deuce, single suited as stated, and big blind checks. We are on the button. Do we bet or not? And here's some ties for everyone. Let's just do one at a time. If opponent donks 13% as stated on the vision, so this is straight from the vision, we check 52 and bet 48, so pretty much 50-50. We bet half of our range to simplify. And what if we have the small stake sim where opponent donks 23% of hands? Now, you might think that, okay, he donks more. Should we change? We should adjust. No, we don't. The 23% on the small stake sim is the same donking range. So we don't really have to adjust. We check 52 and bet 48. we can use pretty much the same strategy. So now we can see that pretty much the actual donking percentage is heavily influenced by how many hands he plays pre-flop. If he plays 80% of big blinds, he's going to donk way less if he donks the same range. If he's really tight pre-flop, he might donk a bit more. But if we know that opponent is donking about solver-ish ranges, then we have a pretty simple frequencies for post-flop, 50-50. But what if we change things? We make things a bit more interesting. If opponent never donks, which is actually quite truthful versus a lot of players in small stakes. I mean, without reads, I would always expect that opponent doesn't have a set donking range. Of course, there are people who donk, but it's not that they know their donking range. It's just they think that I feel like donking now, and the donking range is very unbalanced, and same hand, sometimes he donks, sometimes he's not, and so on. But people who play a lot of small stakes, often they don't have a donking range. Or you can see the donking percentage in heads-up pots is below 5% or something. So versus those players, now, as in many other spots before, solver starts to check a lot more. And if you're wondering why, the answer is simple. If opponent doesn't donk, then his range is not that capped. Because often opponent donks, and most of the donking range interacts with the board. But now when he checks everything, he checks also his strong hand. So he has more strong hands in his checking range. And that's why we cannot c-bet that often. So we start to check back a lot more, and we c-bet only 1/3 of the hands. And what if opponent is maniac, who attacks those kind of small boards with super high frequency, and let's say he donks 50% of hands. Still he has some balance, he has bluffs, he has made hands, he has some strong hands as a trap, so he's not just betting everything that connects with the board blind, but he bets 50%. And we know that there's some traps, there's some strong hands, and so on. But now you can see that if opponent is very aggressively attacking those boards, and he has some kind of logic thinking, then it means that he has some kind of interaction with the boards, blockers, backdoors, something. So his checking range is not check back, but he checks first. His checking range is now weighted towards much weaker range, because he bets almost everything that connects with the boards. He has a lot of check give-ups. And now we can see that if opponent is aggro dunker, when he doesn't, we bet 2/3 of the hand. So it's like the exact opposite of that pie. Now we check only 1/3 of the hands, pretty much hands that have some equity, probably some traps there, but we bet mostly everything like ourselves, like anything that connects with the board, because we have super high fold equity. So let's get into vision and poker tools and everything. Once again, if you wait for me to give you out c-betting range, these are the hands you c-bet, easy game. Now it's not like that, because on these kind of boards, especially, there's a lot of mixed strategies with hand categories. Like, do we always c-bet 2 pairs? Well, yes and no, and maybe and sometimes. So I will show you. I have 3 pages of vision, custom spot, where we can see on the right, I'm probably, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move myself to the left, because now I don't block, because here on the right we have what we want to see, we have the important stuff here. As in vision, you can sort of import your custom ranges from the sim. So on here on this page we have where opponent doesn't donk, and now on the button on the right we can see that our frequency is 5248. No, this is not right. This is the no donk. So I need to change the order. Yes. So now we have the right order. Someone screw my order. How can that be? Let me check. I'm closing one thing here. Come on. Droid. So now this is when opponent doesn't donk, because we can see here on the right that we check 64% of times and bet only 36. Then the middle tab is when opponent donks 13% or in the small stake sim 23%, but versus balanced donking range. And this one is versus Maniac, where we see bet 64%. And then we have poker choose for one additional thing that I'm going to show. So let's go through the frequencies and hands. When opponent doesn't donk, we can say that we bet only 36% of times. And here we have 4 different categories of hands. Sets, 2 pairs, 1 pairs, and no pair, which includes all the draws, blocker bluffs, and everything. And what we can see is that set is c-bet 81% of time. So pretty much, if you want to simplify a lot, then we c-bet sets pretty much always. Top set always, middle set almost always, and then on the bottom set, we can see that we check without, so try bottom set. But if we have even a cut shot or flush draw, then set plus additional equity is always a bet, even versus no donkers. So now if you wonder, okay, what in the no pair category do we bet? Then flush draw with showdown value, like pair and flush draw is bet with high frequency. And cut shot. Here's an interesting, I hope you see in the bottom, not flush blocker is bet 99% of times, so pretty much 100% of times. Like here is an example hand, ace, queen, jack, 8. Pretty much no showdown value, but ace of hearts. Solver likes to bet not flush blocker like it would weigh the not flush. I'm not convinced that in reality versus a lot of players that's a good strategy, because if the flush completes, we don't have enough fold equity or as much fold equity as solver thinks it has, because in solver strategy, opponent is going to fold smaller flushes. People barrel in real life, people don't really fold flushes or even 2 pairs if flush completes and so on. So we definitely do have fold equity, but I would say that especially in smaller stakes, don't play not flush blockers like ace blocker as aggressively as solver does versus your average opponents and call happy opponents. There are definitely situations where we do it, but it's not, it doesn't have as high fold equity as in solver strategy it has. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So, I mean, if we don't have a, flush blocker bet 40% of times, not flush blocker bet always, but that's about it on the bluffing department. Then versus more balanced donking range, which is the, I would say that I haven't seen a single player on PLO 50 all over who would have a balanced donking strategy on these kind of boards. It's just so rare. But now if we compare, now here on the right you see green and red bars. So it shows you like sets, 2 pairs, 1 pair, no pair, how often those are bet. You can see that the change is not huge. We go up from 36 to 48. You can see a bit more of 1 pair and no pair bets. sets, pretty much same kind of frequency, 2 pairs, quite similar, but now we have more 1 pair semi bluffs and no pair bluffs and so on. So our value range seems quite the same, but we start to add some more bluffs. And I can't go down. Here's versus the acro, and now you can see this is the balanced versus balanced donking. Now versus acro, you can see that 2 pair goes up, 1 pair no pair goes up a lot. So now we start to bet a lot. So now the question is more what we don't bet. Quite logical with 2 pairs, top 2 bet very often, top and bottom somewhat often, and bottom 2, 6-2 something is checked, but with additional equity, with open-ender, with the flush draw is a bet. 2 pairs, bottom 2 with a cut shot, not that often, pretty mixed strategy. And then I had the bottom 2 with the flush blocker, once again, bet hundreds of % of times. Like if you have just a single ace of hearts, it's pretty much 100% bet in solver strategy, in all of the solver strategies. And then on the no pair, we check back low flush draws. The higher the flush draw is, the more we bet. Like Broadway flush draws are bet more often than not, but when we go to jack 10 high and low flush draws, that's what we start to check back. And also open-ender without flush blocker is check back. So we check back with flush draws, try open-enders, and pretty much start to bet with almost everything else in our range. So, but that's not something that happens often, that you have super aggressive dunker. So I would say that if you want to pick up your default strategy on PLO 50 and lower, especially PLO 25 and lower, where the reps are quite far from solver strategy. I mean, in my mind and experience, there's a big difference between the top reps on 25 and top reps on PLO 50. I mean, the top of the top are quite, but if we take all the regular names on the games, I don't mean by regular someone who is tight, aggressive, and good, someone who plays a lot. Sometimes regular is a really bad player. But if we take all the regular names and the top 10% of those, then I would say on PLO 50, the top 10 of the reps is way closer to solver strategies than on PLO 25. And then when we go to PLO 10, not even the top ones are, they don't really do solver things. If they would play higher, most likely. So this is the sim that I would focus on, what I am focusing on. When opponent doesn't donk, and then we bet 1/3 on this board. We don't go hyper aggressive on these boards. And you can see that sets are bet often, once again, 2 pairs, top 2, more often than not, but then others check back. 1 pair, more often checked, and no pair, more often checked. Then it's more about the additional cards, and this is a pretty good situation to implement the concept of solver strategy versus just logical thinking and exploiting opponents. To make the decision, you can just think that, okay, it's a board where we shouldn't have a lot of float equity. I'm going to show you why. So if I bet, is it for value or bluff? If it's for value, how many turns I can barrel and can value from? And if I bluff, how many turns I can barrel? So I would say that we bluff with blockers, and of course with blockers it's nice to have at least some equity, like a cut shot. Helps a lot. Or we have a flush blocker and we decide to barrel the flushing turns and rivers. And then if you want to make your life really easy, you bluff blockers and you value bet strong hands and then check back total air without blockers and naked small flush draws, open-enders, and you have a pretty good strategy on the board. It's really hard to exploit that strategy. And then if opponent starts to be more aggressive, like check raising a lot, now the video topic is versus different donking strategies. Now if opponent is very check raise heavy, then we definitely bet less, because then we want to be really polarized with the bets. So it's very easy then to either call or even re-raise or just fold. So versus aggressive check raisers, don't bet your medium strength hands like top and bottom two pairs, or naked top two if you don't know what to do versus raise, and so on. Forgot to unmute. So let's go to one more thing. Here's a poker choose cloud. Same situation. I already created the hand where we open from the bottom. 50% of hand, big blind calls with 40% of hands and would 3-bet around 9% of those. So it's a small stakes range, a bit tighter. And the reason why I chose that, I show you some frequencies with tighter range, with looser pre-flop range, the opponent connects with the board even more often. Because then when the range gets wider, there's more of smaller cards. So on the right, now the action is on the big blind. And if he calls, you have two green boxes here on the right. Now actually three, but the most rightmost is the one we're interested, that says 72.74. That number is how often opponent has these things in his range that are in the snippets, these boxes here below. So I have 3 out of 5 selected, so those 3 boxes are active, and it means opponent has something on his range, these 3 boxes, 72 or 72.74% of times, let's say 73. And now, what we have in the snippets is the flush draw. Then we have the open-ender and wraps. Then we have port card, which is 7-6 or deuce, which is now switched off. We have overpair or better, which is now switched off. And then we have top pair or better, which is switched on. So now the range given for opponent is any flush draw, any open-ender or wrap, which means any decent straight draw, or 7 or better. 7, 8, 9, 10s, jacks, kings, queens, aces, 2 pairs sets. So kind of range that your average opponent on small stakes would call you with if you see bet the flop. He's not folding 7. He's not folding over pairs, probably to 1-bet that easily. And it shows that we have only 27% fold equity, which means that it's not the flop we should bluff. And even if we have good blockers, good rule of thumb is 1 blocker adds 4% to fold equity. So if we have 1 hard blocker, then instead of 27% fold equity, we have 31. If we have a port card, we have slightly more fold equity. So it's not the flop where even with the best blockers, we don't have enough fold equity to make a 75% bet. We need 40% fold equity, and we just can't have it. So it's not the board where I would start to do 1-bet bluffs. There's a lot of flops where we can bet once, and we have enough fold equity, and if opponent folds, nice. If he calls, we can even give up or just ride to showdown. But this is not one of those boards. It's a board where if we want to bluff, then it has to be a hand that we can barrel turns and rivers with. So we never do 1-bet and think, okay, if he calls, I'm giving up. We never bluff without the plan to barrel at least some turns, or at least we shouldn't. So when we see bet mostly for value or planning to barrel with blockers, and as a general rule, to make barreling bluffs, I would say that very often you would want to have some kind of info on the opponent. If he's totally unknown, you just came to the table, I wouldn't start to make triple barrel bluffs, because if you have any information to justify that your fold equity goes up on the flop turn or river, then the EV of a bluff goes up a lot. But if we are totally blind, unknown opponent, we don't know if he's calling station, maniac, wreck, then I would be quite selectful about the bluffs that we start to do as a barreling bluffs. Of course, you can do them. I'm just saying that you don't have to bluff these boards heavily. No one is going to exploit you if you don't. So I would say barreling bluffs if we have at least some info on the opponent that, okay, it calls a lot on the flop, but only continues on the turn if he has really strong hands. Or calls a lot on the flop and turn, folds river without nuts, or close to nuts, or those type of things. And of course, when we have information on the opponent that calls wide, we can start to value bet even wider. Sorry. But it just shows that it's a board where we shouldn't be bluff heavy. And Solver, a lot of his bluffs is with ace of hearts. And as said, be a bit cautious about triple barreling ace blocker when flush completes. I'm not saying it doesn't work, I'm just saying it doesn't work as often as Solver assumes it to work. Because opponents are not playing with Solver strategies, they call down you with any flush. So you make more money by making the flush and then extracting value. Alright, there's half an hour of those donking. Once again, we don't go too heavily on the strategy. Like if we start to open all the categories of different types of hands and frequencies and so on, it would be a really long video. And that's not the idea of the video. It's to show you overall how to adjust versus different donking strategies. And if you want to know more about specific hand combinations or what kind of bottom two we did, I missed it, what kind of bottom two combinations we do bet and so on, what if opponent raises, if any questions rise, like what if, then feel free. You can ask in the comments. I just don't see here on YouTube the comments, but on the Discord we have strategy discussion. Feel free. Make a question. If you want to know, like, okay, if we bet this hand and opponent raises, what do we do in the sim? Feel free to ask. I open the sim and let you know. So don't be afraid to ask questions. These videos are more of a start. And if the video puts your brain into thinking, okay, what if, okay, I bet this hand, what if he raises, what do I do, and so on, it's great. And once we answer that question, the poker thinking evolves. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm happy to explore further. But if I want to explore every possible outcomes, every possible hands, we would have 5-hour videos. And I would be exhausted to make it, and no one wants to watch 5-hour videos or so. So feel free to ask. I hope you enjoyed this scratch on how to change c-betting strategy versus different kinds of donkers. And I will see you on the next video. Stay safe in the galaxy.